The tarmac shimmered under the Kuala Lumpur sun, a heat haze distorting the lines of the waiting military honor guard. It was a scene usually reserved for heads of state, titans of industry, or perhaps royalty from a far-flung land. But today, the red carpet wasn't for any of them. It was for Justin Trudeau's replacement, Prime Minister Mark Carney, a man seemingly on a mission to redefine Canada's place in a world order increasingly skeptical of American leadership. The symbolism was almost too perfect, too pointed. Just days before, Donald Trump, in a fit of pique that bordered on the absurd, had walked away from trade negotiations with Canada. His reason? A political ad featuring Ronald Reagan that offended his delicate sensibilities. It was a move that left many scratching their heads, wondering if the architect of American foreign policy was now being guided by the whims of cable news and Twitter tantrums. And then, Carney arrived in Malaysia. The cameras flashed, capturing every handshake, every carefully orchestrated smile. The military band played a rousing march, the kind usually reserved for allies of paramount importance. It wasn't just a welcome, it was a statement, a declaration that Canada, far from being cowed by American bluster, was actively seeking new partners, new opportunities, a new destiny on the global stage. But the real sting for Washington wasn't just the pomp and circumstance, it was the stark contrast. Trump himself was in Kuala Lumpur attending the same ASEAN summit, yet, despite the deep economic ties between the two nations, despite the history of cooperation, there was no meeting scheduled between the two leaders. None. Zero. It wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate snub, a clear indication of just how far relations between Canada and the United States had deteriorated under Trump's volatile reign. Imagine the scene, the American president, isolated, perhaps fuming in his hotel suite, while the Canadian Prime Minister basked in the glow of Asian hospitality, forging alliances and laying the groundwork for a future where Canada's prosperity wasn't solely dependent on the whims of its southern neighbor. This wasn't just about bruised egos or diplomatic niceties, this was about a fundamental shift in strategy. For decades, Canada had been inextricably linked to the United States, its economy almost entirely reliant on American trade. But that dependence had come at a cost, a vulnerability to American protectionism, to political instability, to the ever-present threat of being caught in the crossfire of Washington's endless power struggles. Carney understood this. He saw the writing on the wall, and he realized that Canada needed to diversify, to build relationships with nations that valued stability, predictability, and mutual respect. Asia, with its booming economies and its growing influence on the world stage, was the obvious place to start. His mission was clear: to double Canada's exports to markets outside the United States within a decade. It was an audacious goal, one that would require a complete overhaul of Canada's economic orientation. But it was also a necessary one, if Canada was to truly chart its own course in the 21st century. The ASEAN summit was just the first step, but it was a crucial one. It sent a message to the world that Canada was serious about its pivot to Asia, that it was ready to be a reliable partner, a trusted ally, a force for stability in an increasingly uncertain world. The air crackled with anticipation as Carney took the podium, the Malaysian flag a vibrant backdrop to his carefully chosen words. He spoke of shared values, of mutual prosperity, of a future where Canada and Southeast Asia could thrive together. He painted a picture of a Canada that wasn't just a source of raw materials, but a partner in innovation, a hub for technology, a champion of free and fair trade. Behind the scenes, however, the real work was just beginning. While Carney charmed the dignitaries, his team of advisors fanned out across Kuala Lumpur, meeting with business leaders, government officials, and academics. They were laying the groundwork for deals, forging connections, and building the trust that would be essential for long-term success. The message was clear. Canada wasn't just here for a photo op. They were here to stay. The next stop was Singapore, a city-state that pulsed with ambition and innovation. Here, Carney found a kindred spirit in the Singaporean leadership, who saw Canada as a potential partner in their own quest for global influence. The discussions were frank, the expectations high. Singapore wasn't interested in sentimentality or empty promises. They wanted concrete commitments, tangible results. Carney delivered. He announced a series of initiatives designed to foster collaboration between Canadian and Singaporean companies, universities, and research institutions. He spoke of joint ventures in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and financial technology. He promised to streamline regulations and remove barriers to trade. The Singaporeans were impressed. They saw in Carney a leader who understood their priorities, who shared their vision, and who was willing to put in the work to make it a reality. But the real test would come in South Korea. A nation grappling with its own economic dependence on larger powers, South Korea represented both a challenge and an opportunity for Canada. The South Koreans were wary. They had been burned before by Western nations that promised much but delivered little. They needed to be convinced that Canada was different, that it was a partner they could truly rely on. Carney knew he had to pull out all the stops. He visited factories, met with labor leaders, and even took a spin in a Hyundai electric car. He spoke passionately about the need for diversification, for a new economic order that wasn't dominated by any single power. He emphasized Canada's strengths, its natural resources, its skilled workforce, its stable political system. But he also acknowledged its weaknesses, its lack of experience in Asia, its tendency to be overshadowed by the United States. The South Koreans listened intently. They saw in Carney a leader who was honest, humble, and determined. They saw a nation that was willing to learn from its mistakes and to build a better future. In the end, Carney won them over. He secured a series of agreements that would increase trade, investment, and cultural exchange between Canada and South Korea. He laid the foundation for a long-term partnership that would benefit both nations. As Carney boarded his plane back to Canada, he knew that the real work was just beginning. The Asian pivot wasn't just about signing deals or making speeches. It was about changing the way Canadians thought about themselves and their place in the world. It was about building a new identity, a new destiny, a new Canada. And that was a challenge that would require the support of every citizen, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Back home, the real battle began. It wasn't enough to charm Asian leaders. He had to convince Canadians that this pivot wasn't just some abstract economic theory, but a path to a more secure and prosperous future. The skeptics were vocal. Industry leaders, comfortable with the familiar embrace of the American market, questioned the feasibility of such a radical shift. Pundits predicted doom, citing geographic realities and deeply entrenched supply chains. The opposition pounced, branding Carney's strategy as naive, idealistic, and a dangerous gamble with the nation's economic well-being. Carney, however, remained undeterred. He knew that changing hearts and minds would require more than just policy papers and press conferences. He needed to show Canadians in concrete terms how this new Asia strategy would benefit them directly. He launched a series of initiatives designed to connect Canadian businesses with Asian markets, trade missions, investment seminars, cultural exchange programs, all aimed at fostering a deeper understanding and appreciation of Asia's potential. He championed investments in infrastructure, upgrading ports and transportation networks to facilitate trade with the East. He pushed for reforms to education, encouraging students to learn Asian languages and cultures, preparing them for a future where global fluency would be a critical asset. Slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. Small businesses, initially hesitant, started to see the opportunities that Asia offered. Farmers, tired of being at the mercy of American protectionism, embraced the chance to diversify their markets. Tech companies, eager to tap into Asia's booming innovation ecosystem, forged partnerships with cutting-edge firms in Singapore and South Korea. The numbers spoke for themselves. Exports to Asia began to climb, chipping away at the overwhelming dominance of the American market. Investment flowed in, creating jobs and driving economic growth. Canadian universities welcomed record numbers of Asian students, enriching campuses and fostering cross-cultural understanding. But the real breakthrough came with the announcement of a major trade deal with the ASEAN nations. After months of intense negotiations, Carney and his team secured an agreement that would eliminate tariffs, reduce barriers to investment, and create a level playing field for Canadian businesses in Southeast Asia. It was a landmark achievement, a testament to Carney's vision and the hard work of his team. The deal sent shockwaves through Washington. Suddenly, the Americans realized that Canada wasn't bluffing. They were serious about diversifying their economy and building a future independent of American whims. Trump Trump predictably lashed out, accusing Canada of betrayal and threatening retaliatory measures. But this time, his threats rang hollow. Canada had built a coalition of allies in Asia who stood by their new partner. The world had changed, and Trump was struggling to keep up. Carney's gamble had paid off. He had successfully navigated Canada through a period of unprecedented uncertainty, charting a new course for the nation's future. He had proven that it was possible for a middle power to assert its independence, to build its own destiny, to thrive in a world increasingly defined by great power competition. His legacy, however, would extend far beyond trade deals and economic statistics. He had inspired a new generation of Canadians to think globally, to embrace diversity, to believe in the power of their own potential. He had shown them that Canada could be more than just America's northern neighbor. It could be a leader on the world stage, a force for stability and prosperity, a beacon of hope in an increasingly turbulent world.